When my husband slammed the prenup on the marble counter, he smirked. "You'll crawl back in 6 months," he said. "You don't even know how money works without me." He forgot one thing: I wrote the damn business plans that made him rich. And he didn't know I'd already started building my own empire from his blind spots. My name is Claire Morton, and for the last 12 years of my 38 on this earth, my identity was a meticulously crafted illusion. To the gilded world of Boston's financial elite, I was Mrs. David Morton, the impeccably dressed wife of a self-made titan, the CEO of Morton Investments. I was the silent partner in a marriage so glossy it reflected the city skyline from our penthouse windows. But the reflection was a lie. The silence was his design, not mine. When we started, back in a cramped Cambridge apartment that perpetually smelled of cheap coffee and ambition, David had a different name for me. He called me his strategic arm. It was my analysis that identified the undervalued tech startup that became our first multi-million-dollar exit. My hands typed the business plan on a second-hand laptop. My voice rehearsed his pitches with him until 3 a.m., and my mind saw the pathways through market volatility that he, with all his charisma, could never navigate alone. We were a team, a two-person engine churning towards a future we built from scratch. He was the face, the handsome, charming frontman who could sell ice in a blizzard. I was the architect, the ghost in the machine who made sure the blizzard never came. But success has a way of rewriting history. The more zeros that appeared in our bank accounts, the more my role was diminished, airbrushed from the corporate portrait until I was nothing more than a tasteful decorative frame. The strategic arm was amputated. I became his dinner party ornament. My value was no longer measured in basis points or risk mitigation, but in the flawlessness of my Chanel gowns and my ability to host a fundraiser that would land on the society pages. My opinions on leveraged buyouts were replaced with opinions on floral arrangements. The transition was so gradual, so insidiously smooth, that for a time I almost believed the narrative myself. Every major deal that built Morton Investments into a powerhouse passed through my hands first. I was the one who drafted the initial term sheets, the one who spent weeks building the valuation models that justified his aggressive acquisition strategies. I negotiated with lawyers, ran due diligence until my eyes burned, and identified the fatal flaws in our competitors' balance sheets. But at the final stage, my name would vanish. Every contract, every SEC filing, every press release bore one name and one name only: David Morton. The intellectual property was his, the credit was his, the empire was his. I was the scaffolding, essential for the construction, but dismantled and hidden away once the building was complete. The final nail in the coffin of our partnership came 4 years ago. On our 12th anniversary, he'd gifted me a breathtaking sapphire necklace, its weight cold against my skin. That evening, as we looked out over the glittering expanse of Boston Harbor from our floor-to-ceiling windows, he put his arm around me. "Claire," he said, his voice laced with the patronizing warmth he now reserved for me. "You've worked so hard. It's time for you to just relax and enjoy it. Why don't you retire? You don't need to do anything anymore." He said retire as if it were a gift, a luxurious prize for my years of service. But I heard the word for what it was in execution. It was my official termination. The next Monday, my corporate email account was deactivated. My access to the shared server was revoked. I was politely uninvited from the weekly strategy meetings I used to lead. My existence within the company I had helped build from nothing was systematically erased. When I questioned it, he smiled that placating smile. "It's for your own good. Darling, less stress. Besides, the board feels it's a cleaner structure this way." Cleaner. That's what I was a mess to be tidied up. That's when I started to look closer, to apply the same forensic analysis I'd once used on corporate targets to my own marriage. I began to understand that our joint assets were a fiction. With the help of a discreet inquiry to a former colleague in estate law, I discovered the intricate web of trusts and offshore LLCs David had established. Everything of value, the company equity, the real estate portfolio. The art collection was meticulously siloed into legal entities that bore his name alone. My name was on the checking account we used for household expenses and the deed to a vacation home in Nantucket, a pittance designed to maintain the illusion of a shared life. He had built a financial fortress, and I was living in the manicured gardens outside its walls, completely locked out. The social humiliation was more subtle but just as brutal. At a charity gala at the Museum of Fine Arts, I overheard one of his partners, a slick hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, laughing with a group of men. "David's got the perfect setup," Marcus slurred, gesturing with his champagne flute. "A genius in the boardroom and a beauty at home to spend the profits. Isn't that right, Mrs. Morton, the dependent?" The other men chuckled. David, standing right there, just draped his arm over my shoulder and pulled me closer, a proprietary gesture that felt more like a brand than an embrace. "She's my greatest asset," he said, and they all laughed again. I smiled. It was a perfect, serene smile, the kind I'd practiced in the mirror, a mask of calm amusement that betrayed none of the Arctic rage icing over my veins. I let them see the ornament. I let them see the dependent. Because dependency is a state of mind, a learned helplessness, and I was never trained to be helpless. I was trained to build, to strategize, and to win. They didn't know about the hard drive. It was a small, 2 terabyte solid-state drive, brushed aluminum, cool to the touch. It lived in a fireproof bag inside a safe, hidden behind a false panel at the back of my cavernous walk-in closet, tucked away behind racks of designer shoes I barely wore. That drive was my memory, my ledger, my truth. It contained the original, time-stamped files of every business plan, every pitch deck, every financial model, and every negotiation strategy memo I had ever written for the company that now bore his name. It held the unedited history of Morton Investments, a history where my name was on every foundational document. David was a brilliant salesman, but he was careless with details, especially the ones he deemed beneath him. He never thought to scrub the metadata. He also never knew about my final lesson. Years ago, when his chief accountant, a nervous but brilliant man named Arthur Finch, was struggling with how to structure the company's first major offshore holding to minimize tax exposure, David had brushed him off. "Just figure it out." Arthur, desperate, had come to me. We spent 2 hours in my home office, just the two of us, with a whiteboard and a pot of coffee. I walked him through a complex but legal loophole, a way of layering shell corporations that would make their risk profile virtually invisible to auditors. It was my strategy, my intellectual capital, that shielded the company's most aggressive financial maneuvers. To this day, Arthur Finch runs the company's books using the principles I taught him. David thinks Arthur is a wizard. He has no idea who wrote the spells. He saw a wife he could sideline, a dependent he could control. He never saw the architect who still held all the original blueprints. The morning it all ended began like any other in our gilded cage. The sun cast long, clean lines across the polished Italian marble floors of the penthouse. The automated blinds had risen silently at 7 a.m., revealing a panoramic, crystal-clear view of the Boston skyline. My coffee, a single-origin Ethiopian blend, was brewing in a machine that cost more than my first car, its aroma mingling with the faint, expensive scent of the white orchids that were delivered twice a week. It was a life of silent, sterile perfection, a life I had architected, and a life I had come to despise. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through market pre-openings on my tablet, a habit I'd never been able to break. When David walked in, he wasn't dressed in one of his usual custom-tailored suits. He wore a stark black polo shirt and gray trousers, his casual armor. He didn't say good morning. He didn't pour himself a coffee. His movements were clipped, precise, and utterly devoid of the easy charm he deployed in public. In his hand, he held a thin manila folder. He didn't place it on the vast marble island between us. He slammed it down. The sharp crack echoed in the cavernous, minimalist space, a gunshot severing the morning's tranquility. "Sign this," he commanded. His voice was flat, stripped of all affection. It was the voice he used for hostile takeovers. "Sign it, or get out." My eyes flickered from his cold, determined face down to the folder. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. A weapon. I slid it towards me, my movements deliberately slow and calm. I opened the cover. The document was thick with legalese, but my eyes, trained for years to find the poison pill in any contract, went straight to the critical clause on page 3, section 4. It was a postnuptial agreement, an amendment to our lives. The line was written in bold, unforgiving text. All intellectual property, tangible or intangible, including but not limited to business plans, strategies, concepts, and proprietary models, conceived or developed by either party during the course of the marriage, is and shall remain the sole and exclusive property of David Morton Industries. The air in my lungs turned to ice. This wasn't just about money. This was about erasure. This was a legal document designed to retroactively steal my history, my contribution, my mind. It was an attempt to officially codify the lie he had been telling the world for years that he was the genius, and I was just the wife. I lifted my gaze to meet his. I kept my voice perfectly even, a placid lake over a chasm of fury. Even the ideas I came up with. A smirk played on his lips. It was a cruel, confident expression I had seen him use 1,000 times on opponents just before he financially disemboweled them. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the cool marble, a predator claiming his territory. "You're my wife, Claire," he said, his voice a low, condescending drawl. "You're not a founder." And there it was, the final, brutal truth of my position in his world. All the years of work, the all-nighters, the strategic breakthroughs, all of it reduced to a domestic title. He expected tears. He expected a hysterical outburst, a plea, a negotiation. He had his script ready for the emotional, dependent wife he believed he had created. So I did the one thing he could never have anticipated. I laughed. It wasn't a warm or happy sound. It was a sharp, brittle exhale, thin and cold and sharp as a shard of glass. It cut through the tension in the room and wiped the smirk clean off his face. Confusion flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by irritation. "What's so funny?" he snapped. I pushed the document back towards him and picked up the heavy, gold-plated pen from its holder on the counter. "You are," I said, my voice as calm as a winter morning. I uncapped the pen. "If you really think this flimsy piece of paper is going to protect you from what I know and what I've built," I looked him directly in the eye, a cold smile touching my own lips for the first time, "then you're going to need a much better lawyer." I signed my name Claire Morton on the signature line with a fluid, deliberate stroke. The ink was a dark, definitive slash on the page, a surrender that was anything but. To him, my signature was his victory, the final lock on his cage. To me, it was a release, a starting pistol, by signing. I was agreeing to his terms of war, and it was a war he had no idea he was already losing. As the ink dried, my mind was already racing, my internal processor running at lightning speed. I wasn't thinking about the penthouse, the art, the money he had so cleverly shielded from me. I was compiling an asset list of a different kind. I was building my army. My mind scrolled through a roster of names, faces, and grievances. First, there was Michael Renner, the software architect David had fired 2 weeks before his stock options vested, cheating him out of a 7-figure payday. Then, Julia Sanchez, the brilliant marketing head whose entire campaign strategy David had claimed as his own in a board meeting, pushing her out of the company she had helped brand. There was Ben Carter, the data analyst who had warned David about the exact market downturn he'd ignored, only to be ridiculed and later laid off for insubordination. And 2 more, just like them, 5 brilliant, resentful people, all casualties of David's arrogance, all bound by a common enemy, 5 seeds of dissent I had just been given permission to water. He watched me, a smug satisfaction returning to his face as he took the signed document. He thought he had broken me, reduced me to nothing. He couldn't see the gears turning behind my calm facade. He didn't know that for the past 6 months. Ever since his retirement speech, I had been preparing for this exact moment. In the pocket of my cashmere jacket, my fingers brushed against a small, cold object. It was a USB drive, no bigger than my thumb, its casing a discreet matte black. It looked like nothing, a piece of corporate detritus. But it was my future. It was my Declaration of Independence. It contained the complete, 80-page business plan for a project codenamed Aurora. Aurora was my masterpiece, a fintech platform I had conceived and designed from the ground up 2 years ago. It was a revolutionary concept, a venture capital platform designed to connect female-led startups with a network of anonymous angel investors, using a proprietary algorithm to vet and match them based on viability and social impact. Not just aggressive growth potential. I had pitched it to David, full of passion and conviction. He had glanced through the executive summary and dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Too niche," he'd said. "Too humane. There's no real money in it. Claire, focus on the big fish." He didn't see the value. He didn't see the massive, underserved market. He didn't see the future. He only saw what fit into his narrow, predatory worldview. So I had archived it, saved it on this one, untraceable drive, and waited. That night, I left. There was no screaming match, no dramatic packing scene. While David was out for a business dinner to celebrate his victory, I walked through the opulent halls of our penthouse one last time. I ignored the walk-in closet filled with thousands of dollars of clothes I didn't want. I ignored the jewelry box glittering with gems that felt like shackles. I packed one suitcase with a few simple outfits, my laptop, my personal documents, and the fireproof bag containing my secret hard drive. I walked into David's minimalist, gallery-like office on his massive, empty desk. I placed the keys to the penthouse, the keys to the Mercedes, and my platinum credit card, which bore his name above mine. I left my wedding ring, the ostentatious diamond he'd used to announce our arrival into the upper echelon, sitting right on top, a neat, silent pile of everything he thought defined me. A statement that I was leaving with nothing he had given me, and taking everything I had earned. As the elevator descended from the 50th floor for the last time, my phone buzzed. It was a text from him. "Good luck surviving, Mrs. Morton." The name was a final, parting shot, a reminder that, in his mind, my entire existence was an extension of his. I stood on the cold pavement of the city street, the chilly autumn air a welcome shock to my system. I looked up at the glittering tower I had just left, a monument to an empire I had built in the shadows. I felt no sorrow, no regret, only a cold, thrilling sense of purpose. I typed my reply, my fingers steady. "Oh, I plan to do more than survive." The penthouse on the 50th floor was a glass box in the sky, a place of silent, polished surfaces and filtered air. My new home was the opposite. It was a third-floor walk-up in a creaky, pre-war building in a forgotten corner of Cambridge. Nestled between a laundromat and a convenience store, the apartment smelled of old wood, dust, and the faint, lingering scent of other people's lives. Instead of a panoramic skyline, my window looked out onto a brick wall. The fall from grace wasn't a dramatic, cinematic plunge. It was a quiet, jarring thud into reality. My financial reality was just as grim. After paying the deposit and first month's rent, my bank account, once a meaningless string of high numbers, held a starkly finite balance, $12,482. It was the last of my personal savings from before the real money came, a forgotten little pool of independence that David had never bothered to absorb into his financial empire. $12,000. It was less than what we used to spend on a single case of wine for a dinner party. It was now my entire world. The news of our separation rippled through our social circle with the quiet efficiency of a poison. It wasn't announced. It was simply known. My phone, once a constant buzz of invitations and vapid check-ins, fell silent. The calls stopped. The texts ceased. Friends who had sworn eternal loyalty at champagne-soaked brunches suddenly became ghosts. I was no longer Mrs. Morton, the wife of a titan. I was Claire, a problem, a piece of social shrapnel from an explosion they wanted to avoid. The isolation was a physical presence, a cold weight in the small, unfamiliar apartment. In the gilded world of David Morton, you were either an asset or a liability. I had been reclassified. For 2 weeks, I did very little. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I ate takeout from the deli downstairs. I walked along the Charles River, anonymous in a plain gray hoodie, and watched the scullers slice through the water with a purpose I no longer possessed. I was adrift in a sea of my own making, the silence of my new life roaring in my ears. The man I had built was trying to break me, and for a terrifying moment, I felt the cracks beginning to form. The spark came not from a grand epiphany, but from a quiet moment of desperation. One rainy afternoon, unable to bear the silence any longer, I put on a pair of headphones and searched for a podcast, anything to fill the void. I randomly clicked on one titled, Second Act Women, Wealth, and Reinvention. The host was interviewing a woman who had lost everything in a bitter divorce from a powerful media mogul. She spoke of being sidelined, of her contributions being erased, of being left with nothing but her own intellect. And then she said the words that jolted me from my stupor. He took my name, he took my money, and he took my past. He thought that left me with nothing, but he forgot to take my ideas. An idea, if it's good enough, can rebuild a world. My heart started to pound, a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. Ideas. He forgot to take my ideas. I scrambled to my suitcase and pulled out my laptop. My hands trembled as I plugged it in and booted it up. I navigated to the secure partition where I kept my personal files, my fingers flying across the keypad. I typed in the password, Ariadne, the name of the mythological princess who used her intelligence to navigate a labyrinth and defeat a monster. And there it was. A single, pristine file, Project Aurora, Master Plan V3H4, PDF. I opened it. The 80 pages of dense text, charts, and financial projections filled the screen. It was all there. The market analysis, the proprietary matching algorithm, the multi-tiered security protocols, the 5-year growth strategy, my creation, my masterpiece. The project David had dismissed as too humane and not profitable. He was wrong. His vision was limited to brute force acquisition and asset stripping. He couldn't see the power in building something new, in empowering an untapped market. He saw kindness as a weakness, not a revolutionary business model. In that dusty Cambridge apartment, with the rain streaking down the grimy windowpane, the ghost of Claire Morton, the dinner party ornament, finally died, and the strategist was reborn in the flickering blue light of a laptop screen. The first step was to test the waters, to see if any of the old bridges were still standing. I scrolled through my contacts, bypassing the socialites and David's cronies, and landed on a name, Julian Croft. Julian had been a senior analyst at a rival firm 10 years ago. We'd been on opposite sides of a brutal acquisition deal. He was sharp, relentless, but fair. I had won, not by being more aggressive, but by being smarter. My financial model had been more accurate, my risk assessment more precise. He had respected my work, even in defeat. After he left that firm to start his own boutique advisory, we'd stayed in touch sporadically. He was a man who valued competence above all else. I composed a text message, my thumb hovering over the send button. It was a shot in the dark. Julian, Claire Morton, a name from the past. Got a minute? I have a question about valuation models. I revised it. Too formal, too weak. I deleted the text and started again. This time with a different approach. I wouldn't appeal to his memory of me as a person, but to his memory of my work. Julian, random question. Do you remember who really built the spreadsheets for the Syntech deal back in 2015? I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The 3 small dots indicating he was typing appeared almost instantly. My breath caught in my throat. His reply came a moment later. Haha, of course I do. They were a work of art. My team spent a week trying to find a flaw. You cost me my bonus that year. Morton, what's up? A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. He remembered the work. That's all that mattered. I typed back, I'm no longer Morton, and I have an idea that's better than those spreadsheets. I need advice. His response, you have my attention. I owe you a meeting for that bonus you lost me. My office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. That night, I didn't sleep. Fueled by cheap coffee and adrenaline, I began the process of resurrection. Aurora couldn't be linked to Claire Morton. Mrs. Morton was a dependent, a socialite, a victim. She was poison. So, I created a new identity, I bought a new domain name, established a new email address, and filed the preliminary paperwork for a new LLC. The founder's name was C.M. Rivers. It was professional, ambiguous, strong. It was the name of a builder. I spent the next several days and nights meticulously recrafting the Aurora plan. I wasn't just copying my old work. I was improving it, hardening it. I dove into the legal framework, and a cold, vicious smile spread across my face as I realized the perfect irony. I would use David's own tools against him. I pulled up the digital files of the boilerplate contracts from Morton Investments, the ones I had helped draft, and began to repurpose them. The aggressive non-disclosure agreements he used to silence former employees, I re-engineered them to create an ironclad shield of anonymity for Aurora's investors. The complex intellectual property clauses he used to claim ownership of everything his employees thought of, I twisted them into a user agreement that guaranteed the female founders on my platform would retain 100% ownership of their IP. Every line of code, every term of service, every security protocol for Aurora was a ghost of the empire David had built, reanimated to serve the very people he would have exploited. I was building my fortress using the stones from his. And then I added my masterstroke. It was a small detail, a few elegant lines of code buried deep within the platform's sign-up and verification API. It was a quiet, digital failsafe. The code was designed to cross-reference the primary funding sources of any startup applying for a spot on the Aurora platform. It would scan SEC filings and private equity databases for a specific list of parent companies and holding corporations. If a direct or indirect investment link was found to a specific entity, the application would be automatically and silently rejected. The entity at the top of that blacklist, of course, was Morton Investments. It wasn't just about revenge, it was a strategic necessity. David's firm was a shark tank. Allowing his money onto my platform would be like inviting a wolf into a nursery. This was a preemptive strike. A hidden wall he would never even know he was running into. He would be locked out of the next frontier of venture capital, not by a court order or a public battle, but by a quiet, invisible line of code I had written in a dusty Cambridge apartment. He thought he had left me with nothing. He was about to find out I had left with the only thing that ever truly mattered, the blueprint. The meeting that would decide my future was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was to be held not in a sterile, intimidating boardroom of glass and steel, but in the digital ether of a Zoom call. My headquarters was my cramped Cambridge apartment, which I had meticulously transformed into a stage. I positioned my laptop on a stack of books so the camera angle was straightened. Not looking up in supplication, I arranged a single, professional-looking lamp to cast a clean, neutral light, deliberately creating a slight shadow over my features. C.M. Rivers was a name, a voice, an intellect. She did not yet need a face. I wore a simple, dark navy blouse, no jewelry, nothing that could connect me to the ghost of Claire Morton. My hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen before the call began. The woman looking back was a stranger hollowed out, yet harder, sharper. My hands, hidden below the desk and out of the camera's view, were trembling, a betraying tremor of adrenaline and terror. I clasped them together, digging my nails into my palms until the shaking stopped. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and clicked, Start Meeting. 4 faces populated the screen, 4 small windows into the world of serious capital I was trying to re-enter. Julian Croft had made the introductions. leveraging his reputation to get me in the door. He wasn't on the call. This was my fight alone. But he had chosen the audience with surgical precision. These weren't just any angel investors. They were survivors of David's world. There was Evelyn Reed, a silver-haired titan of industry in her late 60s. David had orchestrated her removal from the board of a manufacturing company he'd acquired, calling her a relic of a bygone era in a private email that had, of course, been leaked. Next was Dr. Lena Petrova, a brilliant AI developer in her early 40s, whose groundbreaking algorithm David had publicly derided as academically interesting but commercially useless before his own R&D department tried to replicate it and failed. Finally, there were Anika and Ria Sharma, sisters in their early 30s who had founded a sustainable logistics startup that Morton Investments had ruthlessly driven out of business to clear the field for one of their own acquisitions. They were 4 women who had been pushed, dismissed, or crushed by the old guard. They were brilliant, they were hungry, and they knew, intimately, the arrogance of the system I was planning to disrupt. My voice, when I began to speak, was a stranger to me. It was low, steady, and confident. There was no trace of the trembling in my hands. Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. My name is C.M. Rivers, and I'm the founder of Aurora. For the next 20 minutes, I didn't just present a business plan. I laid out a manifesto. I started with the cold, hard data, displaying charts and graphs on the shared screen. Last year, startups with all-female founders received just 2% of all venture capital funding in the United States. This isn't just a social problem. It's a market inefficiency of staggering proportions. We are leaving trillions of dollars in potential value on the table because the current system is calibrated to recognize and reward a single archetype of founder. Aurora is designed to correct that inefficiency. I walked them through a beta demonstration of the platform. I showed them the proprietary algorithm I'd spent the last month refining, an algorithm that analyzed business viability based on over 500 data points, deliberately minimizing the biases of traditional pitch-based evaluations. I showcased the dual anonymity protocol, which protected both founders from predatory questioning and investors from public scrutiny, encouraging bolder data-driven investments. I saved the mission for last. Let me be clear, I said, looking into the small black dot of the camera, trying to project my conviction across the digital divide. Aurora isn't about revenge, and it isn't a charity. It's about access. It's about creating a pure, meritocratic marketplace where the best ideas, not the best connected individuals, win. We will unlock a new generation of entrepreneurs, and in doing so, we will generate extraordinary returns. I stopped sharing my screen, and the 4 faces returned to full view. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Lena Petrova, the AI developer, spoke first. Her eyes narrowed with intellectual curiosity. The algorithm is impressive, Miss Rivers. It avoids the typical pitfalls of pattern-matching AI. Who built it? I did, I replied, without hesitation. Anika Sharma leaned forward. Your 5-year revenue projections are aggressive. What's your plan for scaling user acquisition? I laid out a 3-pronged strategy for guerrilla marketing, strategic partnerships, and community building, a plan I had once drafted for one of David's portfolio companies. Then came the question I had been dreading and preparing for all morning. It came from Evelyn Reed. She hadn't spoken yet, simply observing me with an unnervingly perceptive gaze. Her expression was unreadable. I've been in this business for 40 years, Ms. Rivers, she said, her voice a smooth, authoritative baritone. I know every player in this city. C.M. Rivers is a ghost. There is no record, no history, your strategy, your command of the financials, your cadence. It's all remarkably familiar. So, I will ask you directly, who are you? The other 3 investors leaned in. This was the real test. They weren't just investing in a platform, they were investing in the founder. My anonymity was a shield, but it was also a liability. My heart hammered against my ribs. I held Evelyn's gaze through the screen. I allowed a small, knowing smile to touch my lips, a flicker of the mask I had perfected over the years, now repurposed for my own ends. I am someone, I said slowly, letting each word land with deliberate weight, who has been underestimated for far too long. A beat of silence, and then I saw it. A flash of understanding and something more. Something like grim satisfaction in Evelyn Reed's eyes. She knew. Maybe she didn't know the specific name, but she knew the archetype. She knew the story because she had lived her own version of it. The Sharma sisters exchanged a look. Lena Petrova nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. I had given them the truth without giving them the facts. I was one of them. The rest of the call was a formality. They said they would confer and be in touch. I closed my laptop and the curated persona of C&M Rivers vanished, leaving Claire Morton alone in the silence, my body finally succumbing to a violent, post-adrenaline shudder. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. I paced the floor of my small apartment, a prisoner of my own hope and doubt. I had shot my shot. It was either the beginning of everything or the end of a very short, very foolish rebellion. The email arrived at 6:15 p.m. on Thursday. The subject line was simple. Aurora Equity LLC term sheet. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely click the trackpad to open it. It was from Evelyn Reed's family office, on behalf of all 4 investors. The terms were clean, fair, and founder-friendly, and at the bottom of the first page was the number, a seed investment of $2 million. I didn't scream or cry. I just sat there, staring at the screen, as a profound, unfamiliar sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't David's money. It wasn't a handout. It was a valuation. It was a validation. It was mine. The next month was a blur of focused, relentless work. With the first tranche of funding in my new business account, I formally incorporated Aurora Equity LLC. I signed a lease on a small, unglamorous office space in a shared startup hub in the Seaport District, a space with exposed brick walls, cheap coffee, and the palpable thrum of ambition. I bought used desks and ergonomic chairs off the internet. My first 2 hires were Julia Sanchez and Ben Carter. The marketing head and data analyst David had cast aside. They didn't need much convincing. They believed in the mission. They believed in me. We worked in stealth, building, refining, preparing for our private beta launch. I remained a ghost. When a small tech blog got a tip about our funding and reached out for a comment on the mysterious CM Rivers, I had Julia send back a 1-line reply. No comment. We're focused on the mission. That line, combined with the whispers of a secret, female venture disrupting the old boys club, was like gasoline on a fire. The story went viral. The narrative was too compelling to ignore. A mysterious female founder, backed by an all-star team of women investors, is building a stealth fintech platform to disrupt male-led venture capital. Who is CM Rivers started trending on Twitter and LinkedIn. Pundits speculated. Industry insiders gossiped. I watched the buzz build from my small office, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. My anonymity had become my brand. My silence was now my megaphone. I knew he would be watching. The Boston financial world was too small, the story too close to home. I had been waiting for his move, for the inevitable moment when his ego would force him to reach out. It came on a Friday night, as I was working late, mapping out our launch strategy. My personal phone, the one I kept for emergencies, buzzed on the desk. It was a number I hadn't seen in months, a number that made my stomach clench. It was a text from David, just 3 words, stripped of his usual arrogance, laced with the first hint of uncertainty I had ever seen from him. Is that you? I ignored his text. For a full week, I let it sit there, a testament to his fraying control. He sent another, more demanding this time. We need to talk. I ignored that one too. The third message arrived 2 days later. A complete change of tactic. An olive branch I knew was poison. Claire, for old time's sake, let's have dinner. Talk civilly. My treat. He chose Maria, a sleek, Michelin-starred temple of modern Italian cuisine, where the waitlist was months long and a table was a statement of power. It was our place, the restaurant where we had celebrated the closing of our first billion-dollar fund. He was summoning me back to the stage of our shared history, a setting where he was the undisputed star and I was his supporting cast. He thought the familiar script would force me back into my old role. It was a classic David Morton move: control the environment, control the narrative. I agreed. I arrived precisely on time, not a minute early or late. I wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress, not a designer he would recognize, but one that spoke of quiet, lethal confidence. As I walked through the hushed, opulent dining room, heads turned, but the whispers were different now. I was no longer just Mrs. Morton. I was the mysterious C.M. Rivers. I could feel their curiosity like a physical touch. David was already seated at our usual corner table, a bottle of our preferred vintage of Barolo already breathing on the table. He stood as I approached, a practiced, gentlemanly gesture that was completely at odds with the cold calculation in his eyes. He looked me up and down, a flicker of surprise in his expression. I was not the broken, desperate woman he had expected. "Claire," he said, his voice a smooth, deep purr. He gestured for me to sit. "You look, well," the subtext was clear. "You look well. For someone I expected to be destitute." "I am well, David," I replied, my voice cool and even. I didn't thank him for the compliment. I didn't comment on his appearance. I offered him nothing. The sommelier approached, and David engaged in the familiar ritual of tasting the wine, a small piece of theater to assert his dominance. I simply watched, my hands resting calmly on the table. Once the wine was poured, and we were alone again, he leaned forward, a conspiratorial, patronizing smile on his face. "So," he began, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass, "I hear things. The grapevine is buzzing." He took a sip of wine. "I hear you're trying your hand at business again." He delivered the line with a gentle, almost paternal amusement, as if I were a child who had opened a lemonade stand. He was baiting me, expecting me to be defensive, to eagerly list my minor accomplishments for his validation. I met his gaze without blinking. I didn't touch my wine. "Not trying," I said, my voice cutting through his condescending tone like a scalpel. "Succeeding." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered, replacing it with a dismissive chuckle. He was determined to maintain control. Right. This Aurora thing. Cute name." He waved his hand in a gesture of magnanimous dismissal. "What is it? Some kind of little charity project, a hobby to keep you busy?" This was the moment, the pivot on which the entire evening, the entire war, would turn. All the months of silent, furious work, the fear, the sleepless nights, it had all led to this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list our metrics or our growth rate. I simply reached into my handbag, pulled out my phone, and placed it face up on the crisp white tablecloth between us. The screen was already lit, displaying the lead story on a major tech finance news site. The headline was stark, black, and brutal. Stealth fintech platform Aurora raises $22 million. Series A, led by consortium of powerhouse investors. Valuation nears 9 figures. I let the headline hang in the air between us. I watched his eyes scan the words. I saw the exact moment the information processed, the exact moment the condescension in his posture evaporated and was replaced by something else. His practiced, charming smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. It was as if the muscles in his face had forgotten how to hold it up. The color drained from his cheeks. His knuckles, wrapped around the stem of his wineglass, were white. He had expected me to come to this dinner as a supplicant. He was prepared for tears, for anger, for a desperate plea for a more generous settlement. He was not prepared for a press release announcing a $22 million funding round. He was not prepared for me to be his peer. No, not his peer, his competitor. He finally tore his eyes away from the screen and looked at me. The man I saw now was not the charming CEO or the patronizing husband. It was the predator I had seen in boardrooms, the ruthless strategist who had just realized he had catastrophically misjudged his opponent. "How?" he finally managed to hiss, his voice a tight, strangled whisper. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a small, cold smile. I finally picked up my wine glass. "You taught me everything I needed to know." "David," I said, my voice soft, almost conversational. "You taught me that the real currency isn't money, it's information. Power is about who knows what and who doesn't. You taught me to control the narrative." I took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive wine he had ordered. I was a very good student. His mind was racing. I could see it. He was running through the possibilities, searching for a way this could have happened without his knowledge, a way it could have happened that didn't involve my own competence. His paranoia and arrogance supplied him with the only answer he could accept. His eyes narrowed into slits. "My data," he snarled, his voice low and venomous. "You're using my proprietary data, my investor lists, my algorithms. This is theft, Claire. I'll bury you in litigation so deep, you'll never see the sun again." The accusation was so predictable, so perfectly in character. He couldn't conceive of a world where I could build something without stealing from him, because in his mind, everything I had ever thought or created already belonged to him. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, a sound of pure, unadulterated irony. The sound drew a few glances from nearby tables. "Your data?" I asked, setting my glass down. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a confidential, conspiratorial tone, mimicking the way he used to speak to me when he thought he was being clever. "No, David, I'm not using your data. I have no interest in your bloated, predatory portfolio." I held his furious gaze. "My platform has one simple, elegant piece of code at its heart. It's designed to protect female founders from having their data, their ideas, and their companies stolen by predatory men." I let the smile touch my lips again. Men exactly like you. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. I wasn't just building a company. I was building a fortress designed specifically to keep him, and everyone like him, out. I had created a new kingdom and blacklisted its old king. He was speechless. The great David Morton, the man whose voice could command boardrooms and move markets, had nothing to say. He just stared at me, his face a mask of incandescent rage and dawning horror. He had tried to write me out of his story, and I had responded by writing an entirely new story where he was not even allowed to be a footnote. I had accomplished what I came here to do. There was nothing left to say. I picked up my clutch and phone and stood up from the table. My movements were fluid and unhurried. "Thank you for the dinner," I said, the picture of civility. As I turned to leave, he found his voice. It was a guttural snarl, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to reclaim his power, to issue a threat that still had meaning. "Claire," he called after me, his voice sharp enough to make a waiter flinch. I paused but didn't turn around. "Don't you dare walk away from me. Don't go against me. You have no idea what you're starting." I stood there for a moment with my back to him, a silent figure in black against the opulent backdrop of his world. I didn't need to see his face. I could feel his impotent fury radiating across the room. I could feel the eyes of the other diners on me. Without turning, I spoke over my shoulder, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the suddenly quiet restaurant. "Oh, David," I said, "I already won." And then I walked away, leaving him alone at the table with a $22 million headline and a very expensive bottle of wine he would now have to drink by himself. David did not wait long to retaliate. His humiliation at the restaurant had been a private affair, but his response would be brutally public. The first shot was fired not as a lawsuit or a press release, but as a quiet, digital warning shot that appeared in my inbox a week after our dinner. The email was from an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was a single word, incoming. The body of the message was just as sparse. "Morton Investments has engaged legal counsel. Formal investigation into Aurora Equity for IP theft is underway. They are preparing to file for an injunction. Be ready. I knew who it was from. There was only one person inside that company with the access, the conscience, and the knowledge of the systems I had designed. Arthur Finch. He was repaying his decade-old debt. I closed the email and took a deep, steadying breath. David was doing exactly what I knew he would do. His playbook had only one chapter: overwhelming force. He would try to crush me with legal fees, drown me in discovery, and strangle my company in its cradle with a court order based on a lie. He thought I would be terrified. He thought I would capitulate. He was, as always, underestimating me. I had been preparing for this move since the day I walked out of the penthouse. I swiveled in my chair and called to my small team. Julia, Ben, conference room, now. They saw the look on my face and were at the table in seconds. I didn't waste time. David's coming for us. He's accusing us of intellectual property theft. He's going to try and shut us down. Ben's face went pale. Julia's jaw tightened. Can he do that? She asked, her voice tense. He can try, I said calmly, but he's walking into a trap he doesn't know exists. It's time to go public, not with Aurora's launch, but with its history. I opened my laptop and connected it to the large monitor on the wall. I navigated to the fireproof hard drive's contents, the digital archive of my ghost-written life. Ben, I need you to package every document in this folder, every time-stamped business plan, every email exchange where I outlined strategy, every draft of a financial model with my metadata on it. Pay special attention to the original Aurora file, dated 2 full years before Morton Investments was even incorporated under its current name. Then I turned to Julia. I need you to write a press release, but you're not sending it to the tech blogs. You're sending it to one person, Sarah Jenkins at the Wall Ledger. Jenkins was a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist known for taking down corporate titans. She was famously immune to pressure and threats. The subject line will be, "The wife behind the fortune." The package from Ben will be attached. You will offer her an exclusive, on-the-record interview with an anonymous source who can verify everything. For the next 12 hours, my small office became a war room. Ben meticulously compiled a damning digital dossier, a complete, unassailable record of my role as the architect of David's empire. Julia crafted a narrative that was factual, explosive, and utterly compelling. I, the anonymous source, spent 2 hours on a secure line with Sarah Jenkins, walking her through the evidence, connecting the dots, and answering her pointed, incisive questions. I never gave her my name. I didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself. We sent the package at 3 a.m. The story broke less than 36 hours later, on a Tuesday morning. It didn't just land, it detonated. The Wall Ledger ran it on their front page, above the fold, both in print and online. The headline was exactly as I'd instructed: the wife behind the fortune, how the unseen strategist of Morton Investments was erased and is now striking back. The article was a masterpiece of journalistic destruction. Jenkins laid out the evidence with cold, clinical precision. She published screenshots of my early business plans next to the company's later public filings, showing how they were nearly identical. She cited the metadata, the timestamps, the email chains. She detailed the story of Aurora, framing it not as theft, but as its creator reclaiming her own stolen work. She quoted anonymous sources from within Morton Investments, former employees I had put her in touch with, who confirmed that I was the real brains of the operation for years. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for David. The narrative was too powerful. A perfect David and Goliath story for the modern age, the powerful billionaire CEO exposed as a fraud, his success built on the stolen work of the wife he cast aside. By noon, Morton Investments stock was in freefall. The ticker on every news channel was a bleeding red arrow pointing down. It dropped 8% by the time the market closed. The next day was even worse. Major institutional investors, terrified of the scandal, began to sell off their positions in massive blocks. By the end of the second day, the company had lost 14% of its value, billions of dollars in market capitalization. vanished into thin air because of one news story. David was forced to respond. He called an emergency press conference in the lobby of his corporate headquarters. He stood at a podium, flanked by his lawyers, the Morton Investments logo gleaming behind him like a tombstone. He looked haggard, his face pale and strained beneath the harsh television lights, but his voice was filled with a performative rage. "These allegations are a disgusting and baseless fabrication," he boomed, his eyes scanning the sea of cameras and reporters. "This is a malicious attack by a disgruntled, vindictive individual, a desperate attempt to extort money and slander my reputation. My company, which I built from the ground up, is the sole and rightful owner of all its intellectual property. We have filed a lawsuit to stop this illegal activity, and we will be pursuing all legal channels to the fullest extent of the law." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to, but by calling me a liar, he made his second critical mistake. He gave me a platform. I watched his performance from my office, not with anger, but with a detached, analytical calm. He was playing his part perfectly, the arrogant titan, denying the undeniable. Now, it was my turn. I didn't need a press conference. I didn't need a team of lawyers. I just needed my phone. I sat down at my desk, positioned the phone's camera, and pressed record. I looked directly into the lens. I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was calm, direct, and factual. The video was less than 30 seconds long. "This morning," I began, my voice steady, "David Morton called my story a lie. He said he built his company from the ground up. He claims to be the sole creator of its strategies. So I have a simple question." I paused for effect, letting the silence hang in the air. If I am lying, then why does my name, Claire Ann Morton, appear on the original 2017 draft of the patent application for his company's core trading algorithm? I didn't smile. I just held the camera's gaze for a few seconds longer, then pressed stop. Julia uploaded the video to Aurora's official Twitter and LinkedIn accounts. We didn't add any commentary. We just let the video speak for itself. The effect was instantaneous. The internet exploded. The patent draft was a specific, verifiable claim, the kind of detail that cuts through the noise of a public hesed, she said. Journalists started digging. Within an hour, a source at the patent office anonymously confirmed to a reporter that while my name wasn't on the final, filed patent, it was indeed on several early drafts as a co-inventor. My story was no longer just an allegation. It was a fact. The social media tide, which had been a torrent, became a tsunami. Team Claire began trending worldwide. People who had been fired, sidelined, or screwed over by powerful men saw their own stories in mine. I became a symbol, an avatar for a quiet, simmering rage that had been waiting for a spark. Memes, videos, and testimonials flooded the internet, all in support of the ghost who had come back to haunt the man who tried to erase her. That evening, sitting alone in my office, watching the city lights glitter to life, I scrolled through the endless cascade of news alerts and social media mentions. My anonymity as C.M. Rivers was gone, replaced by the reality of Claire Morton. But I was not the woman whose name David had tried to own. I was someone new, someone forged in silence and betrayal. A reporter sent me one final question via email. "What's your response to all this?" I thought for a long time. I thought of the years of silent work, of being treated like an ornament, of the cold finality in his voice when he told me to sign the papers. I thought of the empire he had built on my intellect, and the new one I was building on his fatal flaw. I typed my reply. He built his empire off my silence. I built mine off his arrogance. The summons came via his personal assistant, the language formal and frigid. Mr. Morton requested my presence at the headquarters of Morton Investments to discuss a matter of mutual and urgent importance, the proposed agenda, de-escalation and resolution. He wanted to end the war. I knew what that meant. A wounded animal is most dangerous when it's cornered. He wasn't looking for peace. He was looking for a kill shot. I agreed to the meeting. I specified the time, 10 Friday. My terms were simple. I would be accompanied by my legal counsel. His assistant's reply was clipped. That is acceptable. The Morton Investments building was a monument to David's ego, a sheer tower of black glass and steel that speared the Boston sky. It was designed to intimidate, to make anyone who entered feel small and insignificant. As I walked through the cavernous marble lobby, the same lobby I had helped design, I felt a cold sense of detachment, as if I were visiting a museum dedicated to a life I had once lived. My lawyer, a sharp, unreadable woman named Hannah Stern, whom Evelyn Reed had recommended, walked beside me. She was a corporate litigator known for her composure and her ruthlessness. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Our strategy had been meticulously planned. We were escorted to the 60th floor, the executive level. The boardroom was at the end of a long, silent corridor. The room was David's throne room, a glass box with a commanding view of the city. A single, colossal mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the space. David sat at its head, flanked by two of his top lawyers. A silent, hawk-faced woman from his PR team sat against the wall, a laptop open, her fingers poised over the keyboard. A corporate secretary was present to take minutes. It was a firing squad, and I was meant to be the condemned. In the corner of the ceiling, discreetly placed but unmissable to a trained eye, was a small black dome, a security camera, recording. David stood as we entered, a facade of civility stretched thin over his palpable tension. "Claire, thank you for coming," he said, his voice a low, controlled rumble. He gestured to the chairs opposite him. "Please." We sat. The air was thick with unspoken hostility. For a moment, the only sound was the distant, muffled hum of the city below. David began, his hands clasped on the polished table in a parody of reasonable discourse. "I think we can both agree that this situation has escalated beyond what either of us intended. The media circus, the market volatility, it's not good for anyone. It's not good for the company I built, and it's certainly not good for your new venture." He spoke as if he were a statesman brokering a peace treaty, not a man whose company was bleeding value because his own fraud had been exposed. I remained silent, letting him play out his hand. Hannah sat beside me, her expression as neutral as a judge's. "I am a reasonable man," he continued, leaning forward. "I am prepared to make this all go away. The lawsuit, the press, the entire unfortunate affair. I am prepared to be generous." He paused, letting the word generous hang in the air like a benevolent gift. This was the moment, the offer, the trap. "I've seen the metrics for Aurora," he said. A flicker of something, was it grudging respect or just greed in his eyes? "The platform is clever, niche, but clever. It has potential. Under the right management." He leaned back, the picture of magnanimity. "So, here is my offer. If you agree to sell Aurora to Morton Investments, I will drop the lawsuit. We'll absorb your company, your team. We'll call it an acquisition. I'll even give you a favorable valuation. A golden parachute. You can walk away. Claire, wealthy, free, no more fighting." He smiled then, a thin, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. He thought he had me. He was offering me the very thing he believed I had always wanted: money without work, a quiet, comfortable exit. He was offering to buy back the idea he had once dismissed as worthless, and he was framing it as an act of mercy. I let the silence stretch. I didn't look at him. Instead, my gaze drifted slowly, deliberately, around the room. I looked at his lawyers, their faces impassive masks. I looked at the PR woman, her fingers frozen over her keyboard. Then, my eyes settled on the black camera dome in the corner of the ceiling. I held my gaze there for a long moment. Then I looked back at David and I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a player who sees the entire board, 3 moves ahead. "You really should have led with that line when the camera was on." "David," I said, my voice soft, almost conversational. Confusion clouded his face. "The camera is on. Standard security protocol." "I know," I said. Then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small, sleek digital audio recorder. I placed it on the mirror-bright surface of the table, directly between us. With a deliberate, audible click, I pressed the red button. A small green light blinked on, steady and bright. "For the sake of clarity and compliance," I announced, my voice resonating with a new authority in the silent room. "This meeting is now being recorded." David's face went white. It was a sudden, stark absence of color, as if all the blood had drained from his head. His lawyers exchanged a nervous glance. The PR woman's eyes widened. An offer to buy a company to make a lawsuit disappear was collusion. It was an admission that the lawsuit was frivolous, a tactic of intimidation, and I now had him on tape saying it. He stared at the small, blinking green light as if it were a bomb. "Turn that off," he hissed, his voice losing its smooth, controlled edge. "No," I said simply, "I don't think I will." Hannah, my lawyer, spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and clear. "My client is well within her rights to record this meeting for her own legal protection, especially given the ongoing litigation your client initiated." David was trapped. He couldn't end the meeting without looking guilty. He couldn't continue knowing every word was a potential nail in his legal coffin. I leaned forward, taking control of the room he thought was his. "You want to talk about acquisitions, David? Let's talk about acquisitions." I slid a rich, leather-bound document folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of him. "That is a provisional purchase agreement." He stared at it, bewildered. "What the hell is this?" "That," I said, "is my counteroffer. It's a proposal for Morton Investments to be acquired." A choked, incredulous laugh escaped his lips. "You want to acquire my company with what your $2 million seed round?" $22 million, I corrected him gently. "And no, that's not the offer." I tapped the folder. "Open it." With a trembling, furious hand, he flipped open the cover. Inside was a single page. It wasn't a complex legal document. It was a term sheet. It outlined a theoretical acquisition of Morton Investments by a third party. And at the bottom, it showed the independent valuation of both companies, conducted by a top-tier, neutral firm that Julian Croft had arranged for me. His own company, Morton Investments, battered by scandal and a plunging stock price, was valued at just under $1 billion. Aurora Equity LLC, with its revolutionary technology, its explosive growth potential, and its untarnished brand, was valued at nearly $2 billion. His eyes widened in disbelief, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. He was staring at a number that told him, in the cold, brutal language of the market he claimed to master, that I was now worth more than he was. "This is insane," he sputtered. "It's a fair market valuation," I said calmly. "And here is my offer to you, David, to end the war." I looked him directly in the eye. "If you want to own Aurora, you can. All you have to do is sell your company first to pay for it." The boardroom was utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the quiet, rhythmic tick-tock of a ridiculously ornate grandfather clock in the corner, a piece I had always hated. Every tick was a second of his empire crumbling. David just stared, his mouth slightly agape, the brilliant, ruthless CEO rendered completely impotent. He didn't know the most important thing. He didn't know who he was really performing for. He thought the only camera in the room was his own. He was wrong. The pen I had placed on the table next to my audio recorder was not a pen. It was a high-definition, wide-angle camera, currently streaming a crystal-clear, encrypted feed. And he had no idea that my lawyer, Hannah, had, 10 minutes before we entered this room, sent a private link to that feed to every single independent member of his own board of directors, with a simple message, "A conversation you need to see, live." So as David sat there, cornered and exposed, I knew that Evelyn Reed was watching. I knew the other 4 board members, the ones whose fiduciary duty was to the shareholders he was bankrupting with his personal vendetta, were all watching. They were watching their CEO attempt to use a frivolous lawsuit to acquire a rival. They were watching him get recorded admitting it, and they were watching him discover that the company he was trying to crush was now officially worth twice his own. They weren't just watching a meeting, they were watching the spectacular, self-inflicted implosion of their own CEO. In real time, the trap hadn't just been set. He had walked in, armed it, and then stepped on it with both feet. The fallout from the boardroom meeting was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. The members of the board, having witnessed their CEO's spectacular self-immolation via a live, secret feed, did not hesitate. Their first duty was not to David Morton, but to the shareholders he had just endangered. They acted with the swift, merciless pragmatism of self-preservation. The next morning, before the market opened, the first press release dropped. It was a sterile, jargon-laden statement from the board of directors of Morton Investments. It announced an immediate internal review into the company's handling of proprietary intellectual property and confirmed that they were proactively engaging and cooperating fully with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was a corporate confession, wrapped in the language of due diligence. They had thrown David to the wolves to save the company. The market's reaction was savage. Trading of Morton Investments stock was halted for the first hour, but when it finally opened, it was a bloodbath. A tsunami of sell orders flooded the system. The major institutional funds, the pension plans, the hedge funds that had formed the bedrock of David's power base for a decade, were now stampeding for the exits. The stock ticker wasn't a ticker anymore. It was a waterfall of red. Confidence in David Morton had been the company's single greatest asset, and overnight, that asset had been wiped from the balance sheet. By midday, the SEC's involvement was no longer a matter of cooperation. It was a full-blown, formal investigation. News vans were camped outside the Morton Investments tower. Their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like vultures waiting for a carcass. The story was leading on every financial news network. Pundits who had once praised David's genius were now dissecting his hubris, replaying my 30-second video, and analyzing the catastrophic stock plunge in real time. The final blow came just before the market closed on the second day. Another press release, this one even colder and more concise than the first. The board of directors had held an emergency meeting. David Morton had been removed as CEO and chairman. Effective immediately, the termination was for cause. There would be no golden parachute, no graceful exit. He was fired from the company he had built. His name stripped from the letterhead while it was still on the building. Evelyn Reed was named interim CEO. The woman he had called a relic was now sitting in his chair. The entire collapse took less than 48 hours. 48 hours to undo an empire that had taken over a decade to build. I watched it all unfold not from a trading floor or a television studio, but from the quiet of my own office. My desk faced a large window overlooking the Boston seaport. That afternoon, a gentle, persistent rain was falling, blurring the cityscape into a watercolor of gray and silver. The drops traced crooked paths down the glass, like tears for a tragedy I did not feel. There was no elation in my heart, no thrill of victory. There was only a profound, cold calm, a sense of an equation finally being solved, a debt finally being paid. The headline that flashed across my screen seemed to be writing the final chapter for me. It was from a major news syndicate, and it was the line that would define this story for the world, the empire she built, destroyed the man who said she couldn't. It was a neat, dramatic narrative, and it was true, in its own way, but it felt distant, like a story about someone else. The rain continued to fall. My phone buzzed on the desk, a single, unobtrusive vibration. It was a text from a number I hadn't blocked, a ghost from my old life. It was Arthur Finch, David's former chief accountant. His message was 6 simple words. "He's gone. You did it." I looked at the message for a long time, the words glowing softly in the dim light of the office. You did it. Arthur saw it as a personal victory, a conquest. But it wasn't. I had never wanted to destroy David. I had only wanted to build something of my own. His destruction was a consequence of his own arrogance, not my ambition. I had simply held up a mirror, and he had shattered himself against his own reflection. I typed my reply, my thumbs moving slowly over the screen. I just showed them who really did the work. I sent it. There was nothing more to say. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The city looked clean, washed new. An email landed in my inbox that changed everything once again. It was from the head of technology investment banking at Goldman Sachs. They had been following Aurora's meteoric rise and the paradigm-shifting narrative surrounding its founder. They wanted to discuss the possibility of taking the company public. They believed Aurora was perfectly positioned for an initial public offering. An IPO, the pinnacle of the world I had come from, a seat at the very table David had once owned, now being offered to me. Julia and Ben were ecstatic, their cheers echoing through our small office. It was the ultimate validation, a sign that we hadn't just survived, we had conquered. But I felt no urge to celebrate. I didn't open a bottle of champagne. I didn't join their impromptu party. Instead, I found myself sitting alone at my desk, unlocking my phone, and opening my text message history with David. My finger scrolled up, and up, and up, past the recent, desperate, unanswered messages, past months and months of digital silence. I kept scrolling back, through the ghost of a life that felt like it belonged to another century, back to the day I left, back to the night he had tried to break me. And there it was, the last message he had sent me that night, a message I had never deleted. It was a monument to his supreme, unshakable arrogance, a prediction that, in his mind, was as certain as sunrise. Good luck surviving, Mrs. Morton. You'll crawl back in 6 months. It had been nearly 2 years. I looked at his words, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty of my failure. I looked out my window, at the gleaming towers of the financial district, at the city that was now mine to conquer. I thought of the valuation report that said my idea was worth twice his reality. I thought of the offer from Goldman Sachs. I thought of my team, my investors, my freedom. I wasn't crawling, I was soaring. My thumbs moved over the keyboard. It was the first time I had replied to him in 2 years. My message was not a taunt. It was not a boast. It was not an expression of anger or triumph. It was a simple, quiet, and final statement of fact. Still standing. I hit send, and then, for the first time, I felt something that felt like peace. The war was over. The work was just beginning. The new Aurora headquarters was not a monument to wealth. It was a testament to work. We had taken over 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in the Seaport District, a space of reclaimed brick, exposed steel beams, and vast, sun-drenched windows that looked out over the harbor. There was no silent, intimidating marble here. Instead, the polished concrete floors echoed with the vibrant hum of keyboards clicking, of passionate debate in glass-walled conference rooms, of laughter from the communal kitchen. The air itself felt different, charged with energy, purpose, and the intoxicating scent of creation. I stood on a small, raised platform in the center of our main atrium, looking out at the faces of my employees. There were 200 of them now, 200 brilliant, driven, exceptional women, engineers and marketers, data scientists and designers, lawyers and financial analysts. They were the engine of Aurora, and they were the reason I was here. Behind me, on the vast brick wall, hung a single, oversized photograph. It was a stark, black and white image taken on a cheap phone camera the day I signed the term sheet for our first $2 million. In the photo, I was sitting on the floor of my cramped Cambridge apartment, a laptop in front of me, a pen in my hand. My face was pale, my hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under my eyes. But in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, I was free. I had insisted the photo be hung here as a reminder of our origins, not a story of glamour and genius, but one of survival and will. My voice, when I spoke into the microphone, was steady and clear, carrying easily through the cavernous space. "Good morning," I began, a real, unforced smile on my face. I wanted to take a moment today, as we officially open this incredible new space to talk about why we're here, not just in this building, but why this company exists at all. The world knows a certain version of our story. The media loves a simple narrative, and ours has been told as a story of revenge, of a woman scorned who built an empire to destroy her husband. It's a dramatic story. It's a compelling story, but it is not the true story. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the crowd. I will not lie to you. The catalyst for Aurora was born from a place of deep, personal pain. It was born in a moment of betrayal when I was told that my ideas, my work, and my mind were not my own, that they were merely the property of a man, an extension of his own ambition. A murmur of understanding rippled through the room. How many of them had lived their own version of that story? But a catalyst is not a foundation, I continued, my voice gaining strength. A spark is not the fire. I did not build this company to tear one man down. I built this company to lift thousands of women up. I built Aurora so that no woman would ever again have to choose between a relationship and her freedom, so that no one would have to silence their own voice to make someone else feel powerful, so that no one's contribution would ever be erased. What we are doing here is not about settling personal scores, it's about correcting a global market failure. We are proving, every single day, that underestimating women isn't just an injustice, it's a catastrophic economic blunder, and we are building the system that will make that blunder impossible to ignore. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, echoing off the steel beams and glass walls. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a roar of shared purpose, of collective affirmation. After the formal part of the town hall was over, I stepped down from the platform to mingle. A young woman, an intern from our engineering department, approached me, her eyes bright with a nervous, intelligent curiosity. "Ms. Morton," she began, her voice a little shaky. "That was incredibly inspiring. Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," I said, giving her my full attention. She took a breath. "After everything that happened, do you regret it? Do you regret that you once loved him?" The question was direct, and it cut through all the corporate noise, right to the heart of the last 2 years of my life. I thought of David, not the monster he became, but the ambitious, charming man I had once worked alongside, day and night, in a tiny apartment filled with impossible dreams. I thought of the genuine partnership we once had, before it was corroded by money and ego. I smiled at her, a gentle, reflective smile. "No," I said, and the answer felt more true than anything I had ever said. "I don't regret it. Pain is a powerful teacher. Betrayal forces you to find a strength you never knew you possessed. I would not be standing here today, as the founder of this company, if I hadn't been pushed to the very edge of my own breaking point." I looked from her face to the sea of other brilliant women around us. If not for him, I never would have discovered what I was truly capable of building. I never would have known the depth of my own power. As I walked back toward my office, I saw the new slogan we had just unveiled, glowing on a large digital screen by the elevators. It was simple, stark, and true. Aurora built by the underestimated. My office was a corner space with glass walls, a transparent room at the heart of a transparent company. On my desk was a framed copy of the latest issue of Forbes. I was on the cover. The headline beneath my picture read, "The Woman Who Turned Betrayal into a Blueprint." It was a powerful line, and it captured the essence of my journey. I had taken the very tools of my oppression, the complex legal structures, the aggressive business tactics, the control of information, and forged them into instruments of liberation for others. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at my reflection. For years, when I had looked in the mirror, I had seen a carefully constructed facade, Mrs. Morton, the elegant wife, the dinner party ornament. After I left, for a time, I had seen a victim, a ghost, hollowed out and erased. But the woman staring back at me now was neither of those things. I saw the fine lines of exhaustion around my eyes, the silver strands in my hair that hadn't been there 3 years ago. I saw the scars, but I also saw a clarity in my gaze that had never been there before. I saw a strength in the set of my jaw. I no longer saw the wife or the victim. I saw the architect. I saw the founder. I saw Claire. I turned away from the window and walked toward the door, back out into the bustling heart of my company. The bright morning sun streamed into the atrium, catching the edge of the large, brushed steel Aurora logo on the far wall, making it gleam with a brilliant, hopeful light. I paused in the doorway, a quiet thought taking shape in my mind, a final, silent answer to the man who had set this all in motion. He thought I'd crumble, I said to myself. Instead, I learned to build. 1 year later, the stage was an island of light in a vast sea of darkness. The annual Women in Power Summit was the most prestigious event of its kind, and the closing keynote was its highest honor. The auditorium held 5,000 people, a silent, expectant congregation waiting for the final sermon. Backstage, I could hear the low, electric hum of their anticipation. It was a sound that had become familiar over the past year, but it never failed to send a quiet, thrilling tremor through me. So much had changed. Aurora's IPO had been a staggering success, one of the largest tech offerings of the year. We were no longer a disruptive startup. We were a market force, a NASDAQ-listed corporation with offices in 3 countries. We had funded over 100 female companies, creating thousands of jobs and generating billions in new value. We were a blueprint that was being replicated, a new chapter in the history of capital. I was no longer a mystery. My face was on magazine covers, my story a modern fable of betrayal and triumph. I was Claire Morton, the founder, the CEO, the woman who had built her own sun. But as I stood in the wings, waiting for my introduction, the quiet roar of the crowd faded, and for a moment, I was back in that dusty Cambridge apartment with $12,000 to my name and a future that was a terrifying, blank page. I remembered the cold weight of the isolation, the gnawing fear that David had been right, that I was nothing without him. The woman who stood here tonight, about to address a global audience, had been forged in that silence, in that fear. She had not forgotten the feel of the ashes from which she had risen. And now, the host's voice boomed from the stage, pulling me back to the present. To deliver our closing keynote address, a woman who has not just shattered the glass ceiling, but has redesigned the entire building, the founder and CEO of Aurora Equity. Please welcome Claire Morton. The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that washed over me as I walked from the darkness into the blinding white light. I smiled, a genuine, grateful smile, and walked to the center of the stage. A single lectern stood there, but I ignored it, preferring to stand unshielded before the audience. On the colossal screen behind me, the simple, elegant logo of Aurora glowed with a soft blue light. I waited for the applause to subside, my gaze sweeping across the thousands of faces, visible only as silhouettes beyond the glare of the stage lights. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm and steady, amplified throughout the vast hall. "A year and a half ago, if you had told me I would be standing on this stage, I would have told you that you were insane. A year and a half ago." My world had been reduced to the 4 walls of a small room. I had lost my home, my career, my name, and my history. I had been told, by someone I trusted, that I didn't even know how money worked. A ripple of knowing laughter went through the audience. "It turns out," I continued, a wry smile touching my lips, "that he was right. I didn't know how his money worked. I didn't understand the rules of a game where value is extracted, not created, where power is a zero-sum calculation of what you can take from others, where success is measured by the empires you conquer, not the communities you build. So, I decided to stop playing that game. I decided to write the rules for a new one. For the next 20 minutes, I didn't tell my personal story. They already knew it. Instead, I told them the stories of Aurora's founders. I spoke of a biochemist in Ohio who was curing a rare disease, funded by us after every mail-old VC firm had told her the market was too small. I spoke of a software engineer in Nigeria who was building a mobile banking platform for rural women, a platform now used by millions. I spoke of a single mother in Arizona who had created a sustainable packaging company out of her garage, a company that was now a major supplier to two Fortune 500 corporations. Power, I said, my voice resonating with conviction, is not a fortress to be defended. It is a current to be shared. The old model was built on scarcity, on the idea that there is a finite amount of success, a limited number of seats at the table. That is a lie. We have proven that when you build more tables, there is more than enough success to go around. Our mission at Aurora is not to simply get a bigger piece of the existing pie. Our mission is to bake 1,000 new pies. I ended my speech with a simple call to action. Look around you, I said. In this room is the talent, the intellect, and the will to solve the world's most complex problems. Do not wait for permission to use it. Do not wait for a seat at a table that was not designed for you. Build your own. The future is not something we wait for. It is something we build, together. The standing ovation was immediate and overwhelming. I stood there for a moment, letting the wave of sound and emotion wash over me, a feeling of profound connection to the thousands of women in the room. After a few moments, the moderator returned to the stage, gesturing for the audience to sit. Thank you, Claire, for an absolutely electrifying keynote, she said. We have time for just a few questions from the audience. Hands shot up across the auditorium. I answered questions about our international expansion plans, about the future of AI and venture capital, about work-life balance, and then the moderator pointed to a young woman in the third row. Yes, you there. The woman stood. A microphone was passed to her. She looked to be in her early 20s, a student perhaps, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and nervous determination. Hi, Ms. Morton, she said, her voice clear despite her obvious nerves. My friends and I have followed your story from the beginning. It's everything to us. My question is, I know you've moved on, and you're focused on the future, but everyone knows the story. We all know who you're talking about. If he were watching this right now, if David Morton were watching this broadcast, what would you want to say to him? A dead silence fell over the 5,000-strong audience. It was the one question I had never answered, the one raw nerve everyone had been too polite to touch. Every camera in the room swung to focus on my face, on the giant screen behind me. My expression was magnified 100 times, my every flicker of emotion on display for the world to see. I felt the weight of that question, the weight of the past it dragged with it. I could feel the ghost of him, of our shared history, standing on the stage with me. For a fleeting second, I saw his face in my mind's eye smirking, confident, utterly certain of my dependence. And then I smiled. It was not a smile of anger or bitterness or even triumph. It was a smile of pure, unburdened freedom. I looked out at the young woman and at the thousands of other women watching me, waiting for my answer. He said I couldn't live without him, I began, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. Then, I shifted my gaze. I looked away from the audience, away from the moderator, and directly into the lens of the main broadcast camera. I was no longer speaking to the room. I was speaking to the world. I was speaking to him. My voice was no longer soft. It was a quiet, unshakable declaration, a promise and a verdict in 3 simple words. Watch me build. For a single, breathless second, there was absolute silence, and then the auditorium erupted. It was not just applause. It was a roar, a cathartic, explosive release of sound and energy that shook the very foundations of the building. The stage lights flared, washing me in a brilliant, blinding white. On the massive screen, my image was frozen confident, proud, a woman standing alone, needing no one's protection, bathed in the light of a world she had made for herself. The broadcast camera began to pull back, slowly, steadily. My solitary figure on the stage grew smaller, becoming a part of a larger picture. The shot widened, moving past the stage, past the cheering audience, until it was outside the convention center entirely. The camera soared up and up over the glittering expanse of the city at night, finally settling on a single, gleaming tower of light. It was the Aurora Building, its 3 floors of windows all lit up, a beacon of blue light against the dark Boston skyline. The screen faded to black. And then, one final line of text appeared, glowing in a simple, elegant white font. From his shadow, she built her own sun. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And if you want to help this story reach even more people, please support us by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world.